I'm Julie Holm. I'm in the Northern Association. I pastor three teeny tiny churches, 2 UCC, 1 ELCA here in Rebersburg, which is about 35 miles east of State College, deep in Appalachia. And I'm thrilled to be introducing Reverend Silver, Marvin Silver, because we both come from the Central Atlantic Conference, and for me, the Potomac Association, and we even have a seminary in common because we both went to Howard University. So I know at least him by reputation pretty well. Since we do both come from Howard University, I thought it would be appropriate to start with a poem by Howard Thurman. This is one of my favorites, and I think it is apropos to our topic this evening. And if you have never heard the name Howard Thurman, immediately after this call, look it up. This is called "The Threads in My Hand." Only one end of the threads I hold in my hand. The threads go many ways, linking my life with other lives. One thread comes from a life that is sick. It is taut with anguish, and always there is the lurking fear that the life will snap. I hold it tenderly. I must not let it go. One thread comes from a high-flying kite. It quivers with a mighty current of fierce and holy dreaming, invading the common day with far-off places and visions bright. One thread comes from the failing hands of an old friend. Hardly aware am I of the moment when the tight line slackened and there was nothing at all, nothing. One thread is but a tangled mass that won't come right. Mistakes, false starts, lost battles, angry words, a tangled mass. I have tried so hard, but it won't come right. One thread is a strange thread. It is my steadying thread. When I am lost, I pull it hard and find my way. When I am saddened, I tighten my grip and gladness glides along its quivering path. When the waste places of my spirit appear in arid confusion, the thread becomes a channel of newness of life. One thread is a strange thread. It is my steadying thread. God's hand holds the other end. I hope you are all here for the workshop on moving the racial justice agenda forward in the local church. I am thrilled to introduce Marvin Silver, who is the Associate Conference Minister for Justice and Witness Ministries in the Central Atlantic Conference of the United Church of Christ. That conference includes 167 local churches along the Mid-Atlantic region, covering New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, DC, and parts of Virginia and West Virginia. I always point that out to those of you who think the Northern Association is so huge. Serving the eastern region of DC, Maryland, that is stretching north to Gaithersburg and east to the Eastern Shore, and Virginia, south to Richmond and Chesterfield. Reverend Silver works to maintain a climate of pastoral care through guidance and support of clergy, local churches, and peer-to-peer pastoral support networks. He organizes and mobilizes the expertise and leadership of professional networks for church development and congregational vitality, in keeping with the conference New Visions ministry. In response to local churches facing uncertain futures and questions of legacy, Reverend Silver has developed the Nehemiah Pilot Project in partnership with Church Building and Loan Fund to provide a transformative experience and process of living into and fulfilling the gospel ministry and mission in new ways that meet the growing needs and challenges that God's people and the world are facing today. In addition, he serves as the primary Central Atlantic Conference ministry team member for Justice and Witness Ministries. More than just responding to social injustices, Reverend Silver is transforming the conference's paradigm and approach to the work of justice by building a new justice movement based on a vision, mission, and set of core principles that defines and unites local churches, clergy, and justice leaders into a powerful, effective, and faithful organizing network. As the architect of the conference's new Justice and Witness Action Network, he collaboratively organizes and leads strategic campaigns to advance a justice agenda regionally and nationally. His ministry vision, transforming lives and communities, is transforming lives and communities, excuse me. Reverend Silver earned a Bachelor of Science in Political Science from Bowie State University in Bowie, Maryland, and a Master's of Divinity from Howard University School of Divinity in Washington, D.C. He is also a graduate of Harvard University Divinity School Summer Leadership Institute, a cutting-edge training program for clergy and lay leaders involved in faith-based community and economic development. He lives in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, with his lovely bride, Sheila Renee Silver, and their 3 children. And please, I hope I get this right. I think it's Anaya, Amira, and Jonah. Is that close? Okay. I will be monitoring the chat for questions. So if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Also, I want to remind you that this is being recorded, and whatever that might mean to you, all of our workshops are being recorded. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Reverend Silver.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you, Shirley. Thank you both for your leadership, and thank you for hosting tonight's workshop, moving the racial justice agenda forward in the local church. Thank you, Penn Central Conference, for inviting me to be a part of your annual meeting this year and to come and to share with you, to be in covenant partnership with you in the work of justice. As Julie mentioned, one of my many responsibilities in the Central Atlantic Conference is the work of justice, and we do our racial justice work through our new justice movement called the Justice and Witness Action Network. And today, this evening, you will have the opportunity to learn a little bit about the work that's emerging out of our issue-based network called the Racial Justice Network, as well as I want to take a little bit of time and sort of learn a little bit more about you, how you are working on the work of racial justice, and to see how we may find some common interests as well as some common ways in which we could work together moving forward. Hopefully we can do all of this in the allotted time. I usually, coming from a local church pastor background, I usually say that if we can't get anything done by 8 o'clock, then we don't need to meet. So I know that the 8 o'clock hour is the cutoff time, and I'm hoping and praying that we will be done by then, if not before. So let me share my screen. Can everyone see my screen? Okay, great. Let me go to full screen here. Okay, great. So I want to start out first and just share a little bit about my story in racial justice work. It actually begins before 1992. It actually begins back in 1980 when I was just 6 years old. And as a young man, I committed myself to work on racial justice issues and to try my best to change the world. I had been witnessing and my family had been experiencing some of the many realities of white supremacy, racial injustice, and poverty. And it was quite clear to me at that particular age that I felt like I had a role in making the world better. All of this work began to actualize when I got connected to a new church start in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, called Amistad UCC, which was a local church committed to racial justice ministry. Moving forward, I had opportunity to serve as a General Senate delegate, working on, as you all know, the many resolutions that come out of our local churches and conferences around many different issues. And then I also had the opportunity to serve as a housing and hunger intern in the former office of the Church and Society, which is now called our UCC DC office under Justice and Local Church Ministries. And then following that, even while I was in seminary at Howard University School of Divinity, I then joined the New Covenant Ministry under the restructure of the national offices. At that time, what was called Justice and Witness Ministries. I served as the policy advocate. And one of my main tasks was to be in community and relationship and collaborative partnership with the Council of Racial and Ethnic Ministries to advance our policy agenda, both in Washington, D.C. and around the country. And there's a reason why I'm sharing my story, and I'll get a little bit back to that in a moment. What I want to do is just take an opportunity and sort of note a few things from our UCC history, some of which many of you may know. Back when the UCC was formed, the bylaws, 1957, included the Commission on Racial Justice. And as you know, that was a national ministry of the denomination for quite some time and engaged in some very important work. In addition, back in 1963, the denomination adopted a statement calling on members of the UCC to uproot intolerance, bigotry, and prejudice within our own living and replace with goodwill the determination to strike down immediately the barriers which divide men on account of race. It's one of those old resolutions of the church. And then two new all-church offerings were instituted, one of which we still celebrate and give to today. One great hour of sharing, known as OGHS, and then a justice-oriented one, which we now know as Neighbors in Need. Many racial justice ministries come out of those two offerings in our national setting. And then that same year, there was a resolution adopted, a call to action to fulfill racial justice now, which called upon our churches to open up church membership, to witness for inclusiveness in our local churches, to provide equal opportunity for service and leadership, establish open door policies and implement fair employment practices, and provide financial support to our clergy. And then what I thought was quite interesting when I looked at our UCC history, that Reverend Dr. King actually spoke at one of our general synods under a title presentation called Man in a Revolutionary World. Continuing on, the Commission for Racial Justice was then established in 1969. Crisis in a National Program was adopted around racial justice concerns. Some actions that have been taken both by General Synod and our national setting included $17 million to address financial crisis of 6 of our historically Black, historically African-American colleges and universities, many of which were founded by the American Missionary Association. Bail money, for those who know the story, was approved for the Wilmington 10 in Wilmington, North Carolina. For those who know that story, I encourage you to look that up on the UCC website. And then, we're known as the church who, particularly Reverend Dr. Ben Chavis, termed the phrase environmental racism and released a study called Toxic Waste and Race, which highlighted environmental racism in many communities of color across the South. General Synod established Council for Indian Ministries, Pacific and Asian American Ministries, and the Council for Hispanic Ministries. And then followed up and established the Council on Racial and Ethnic Ministries, who brought all of those historically underrepresented groups together under a council. Here's some noteworthy resolutions for those who may not know. Back in 1993, there was a statement on Christian conviction on a proposed pronouncement calling the United Church of Christ to be a multiracial, multicultural church. Leaders in the church felt that that was important, yet in order to live deeply in what it means to be multiracial, multicultural, leaders then followed up and came back in 2003 and put forth a resolution calling on the church to be an anti-racist church. I know some of this history because some of those leaders actually came out of the Central Atlantic Conference, who was leading these efforts. So we like to lift up the great work that they have been doing. General Synod just recently, and back in 2017, particularly the General Synod that took place in Baltimore, approved a resolution around affirming and supporting the authorized ministries of underrepresented clergy and local churches, call for greater representation and economic justice. This is a resolution that actually came out of the Central Atlantic Conference that was really trying to bring attention to and enforcing and calling upon the church to address the issue of the fact that many of our historically underrepresented groups in that Council of Racial Ethnic Ministry, many of them were not serving as senior pastors in our local churches. Oftentimes you would see them in associate pastor positions. And because of that, that would impact their economic livelihood. So it was a resolution to bring attention to that issue and try to provide some solutions, some prescriptives through the search and call process by way conferences and local churches could address those issues that were impacting the church. In addition, that same General Synod passed a resolution calling on establishing some procedures for cultural diversity training for our authorized ministers, similar to what many of our conferences across the UCC, particularly our committees on ministries, require around boundary awareness training. And then here's some references if you're interested in sort of learning more about the United Church of Christ history on racial justice. These are some pages that I think are still active on our denomination's webpage that you can go and learn more about the racial justice work that has been happening over time. So let me take a moment here and share briefly that as part of the work that we have been doing in the Central Atlantic Conference, particularly through our Justice and Witness Action Network, we have been trying to live into a new identity of what it means to be a justice church, what it means to be an anti-racist church. And one of the things we oftentimes lift up and discuss in our meetings and our strategy discussions is we need to make sure that we who are here today in the church put our mark on the church's justice ministry, that we would not just be celebratory and happy of all the things that came before us, of who we are or who we were as a justice church, because many people know the United Church of Christ story well. At least they know at minimum that we are the church that does a lot of justice work, right? But I oftentimes found through my time doing justice work in the United Church of Christ that we tend to talk a good game about that we're the justice church, but oftentimes we very rarely, those of us who are in the church today, actually do justice work. We tend to, as I like to coin or say, we like to live off the history of those who came before us in proclaiming and celebrating those first that are part of who we are and the great work that our ancestors have done before us. But what are we doing right now? How are we living into that commitment that the gospel of Jesus Christ calls us to be the beloved community? And back in 2015, the Central Atlantic Conference, just as many communities across our country, experienced a great racial injustice. Many of you may know the story in Baltimore back in 2015, where the Baltimore Police Department profiled mistreated, mischaracterized, and violated a young African-American man named Freddie Gray's civil rights, leading to his untimely death. We stood in solidarity with the peaceful protesters who demanded justice for Freddie Gray, and we also mourned with his family. Yet our collective response and commitment across the conference to this matter in a lot of ways was limited, and in some instances indifferent. And just as Freddie Gray's death has done with the recent acts of racial injustice across our country, still point to a continuing systemic problem that calls for a response that goes beyond being just pastoral, offering thoughts and prayers, and just talking about it or reading books, but to engage in some real action, some transformative change, action that brings about what I like to say transformative impact and lasting change. So we recognize and understood in the Central Atlantic Conference that we are living in what we call some eerily similar times of our nation's past, and that raises major questions and concerns about how we got here and where do we go from here. And once America's original sin of racism and white supremacy is reminding us that we too often have avoided the work of racial justice and pushed it aside as if it's not present in the very fabric of who we are as a nation and even the church. So we wanted to move beyond just statements. We wanted to move beyond just resolutions. And a part of our Justice and Witness Action Network, we wanted to be intentional first about prioritizing the work of racial justice. But more than that, concretely finding ways in which we can work collaboratively with local churches, but also make sure that there was a team of leaders in our local churches who were helping to facilitate that congregation's understanding, developing their capacity to do the work of racial justice, and actually engaging in racial justice work. And we witnessed and recognized that we had a great tool in our toolbox. But before I get to that, one of the things we wanted to sort of ground ourselves in was in our historic UCC Witness. And that pronouncement that I mentioned a little bit earlier, adopted back in 2003, calls upon the United Church of Christ to be an anti-racist church. And here's some of the language. Whereas General Synods of United Church of Christ have since 1963 voted 11 resolutions, statements, and pronouncements denouncing racism, it is time to honor mandates and expectations of this body and of the church. Therefore, let it be resolved that the United Church of Christ is called to be an anti-racist church, and that we encourage all conferences and associations and local churches of the United Church of Christ to adopt anti-racist mandates, including policy that encourages anti-racism programs for all United Church of Christ staff, volunteers, et cetera, et cetera. So we took this resolution to heart, and our Racial Justice Network took advantage of the moment back in 2018 and 2019, when a lot of resources were emerging out of our national offices, like the White Privilege Curriculum, Sacred Conversation to End Racism Initiative to train facilitators in doing the work of racial justice. And we developed some trainings along the way to begin to develop a core set of leaders who would work collectively across the conference to do the work of justice. But in addition to that, we wanted to dust off a resource that we had at our disposal since 2006, which was developed by leaders in our conference, called the Anti-Racist Local Church Audit. So our Racial Justice Network, a leadership team, came together to review that tool, that resource, to try to live into this resolution that I just mentioned, as well as to live more deeply into our new justice movement and what it meant to be a justice justice and witness action network, to really try to figure out how could we begin to work in our local churches to really begin to transform them in ways to be the beloved community or start the journey of becoming the beloved community. And then we recognize, no, it's really not just about the beloved community. It's about what does it mean to become and be anti-racist at its core. And that it was not enough for our local churches just to do book studies or to give prayers and thoughts when instances of racial injustice would happen in and around the country or locally within our conference, but that we had to do more. We had to be sort of a authentic representation of the gospel of Jesus Christ that was welcoming and opening to all. So over the last 2 years, particularly in the pandemic time of 2020 and 2021, we had a team to redevelop this anti-racist local church audit. And what we learned is that many of our congregations are really not ready to even do an audit. Many of them really need to sort of start doing some initial work, which is sort of creating a safe space to learn in their congregations on what is racial justice, what is white supremacy, what does it mean to be anti-racist, et cetera, et cetera. And we developed a participant covenant to help engage local churches who were interested in doing this particular work, so they can be in covenant relationship on how to have conversations around race and stay at the table and stay committed to do the work, but not allow the heated moments that oftentimes emerge when you have conversations around race to put a pause or even stop the work from moving forward. We also recognized and learned as we were redeveloping this too, that we had to make sure that this work was being anchored in biblical stories that called us out to do this work. So we drew upon many of the resolutions that came out of General Synod over the years. And then we also recognized that there needs to be a clear education within our local churches about the theological basis for anti-racism work. And I want to read to you sort of the theological basis for anti-racism work that we have in our anti-racist local church audit. It reads, "It should go without saying, Christian faith compels us to fully engage in the work of anti-racism. It compels us because every person is created in the very image of God, and each is a bearer of God's divine spark. It compels us because more than anything, we are commanded to love God and to love our neighbor, every neighbor, as ourselves. It compels us because racism is oppression, and faithfully following Jesus requires releasing captives and letting oppressed people go free. It compels us because what we do for the people society casts out and marginalizes, we do also for Jesus. It compels us because Christianity's highest calling is to live into heaven on earth, to create a world in which absolutely every person experiences God's love as much as absolutely every other person. Somehow the church forgot all of that somewhere along the way. Instead of standing up to and pushing against power, the church became that power. Instead of fighting for the rights of disenfranchised people, the church institutionalized and perpetuated inequity and inequality based on policies driven by white supremacy. That fundamental injustice has been handed down from generation to generation, so that at this point, it is virtually imperceptible until we really look for it and discover that it indeed permeates every aspect of the world in which we live. Recognizing that critical imbalance, our Christian faith compels us now to repent, to own our transgenerational sins, and to confront institutional evils in ways that right ancient wrongs. What's more, our Christian faith compels us to undo the effects of the church's long-standing complicity in societal racism far and wide. Our Christian faith thus compels us to examine ourselves and our life together and to find a way forward that is more just and more loving for everyone. May your engagement in this process of self-assessment relative to race and racism provide meaningful insights and transformative experiences. even as it strengthens your faith and makes the world a better place for all of God's people. In addition, back in 2019, our racial justice leadership team developed a racial justice framework, which we believe was critically important because we kept hearing this constant question from pastors and from church lay leaders when an incident of racial justice would emerge or occur. What can we do? What should we do? So we wanted to provide a framework for people to sort of understand how they could begin to navigate those moments beyond the work that we would engage them in. So we developed this framework here, that the work of racial justice, dismantling racism at the personal, congregational, community, institutional levels by creating change. And that it really starts at the personal level. And it starts with raising awareness. And this may involve some independent study, group study, kind of where many of us sort of find ourselves in many of our churches, whether it be through hearing sermons or using the resources that have come out of our national offices, as well as engaging in book studies as well, or watching documentaries as well. And then also there's a sort of a second phase. After you get through the phase of awareness, naturally one person would need to sort of develop the skills by way in which they can engage in bringing about change around a particular issue. So building capacity is critically important. And that happens through, workshops. For us, we encouraged our folks to join our racial justice network. And we recognize that community organizing is at the heart of what we are trying to be as a Justice and Witness Action Network. And this builds upon the principles that we have to break down this old paradigm that we are the savior of God's world, that we enter into relationships with impacted people about injustices as their savior. But no, we enter into relationship with them to be in relationship with them, to learn who they are, to learn about their struggles, to embrace their own power and agencies to bring about the change that they need for themselves. We stand in solidarity and we bring our gifts and resources to bear to bring about the change that they are seeking. So it's a different approach to doing the work of justice, as well as moving away from the paradigm within the United Church of Christ, which seeks to oftentimes, as I witnessed in my time in the United Church of Christ, is to do the work of justice through resolutions or just workshops or just showing up at a march, which I believe sort of now has sort of become the equivalent that we've historically have talked about is like doing charity work, although good and necessary work, but doesn't go as far to really alleviate the issues that most people find themselves in, but just helps to meet the immediate need. And then also the third part to any of this work is taking action. How do you take action to begin bringing about that transformative impact and lasting change that's so critically needed around so many different issues? So you do this work at the personal level, at the congregational level, at the community level, whether it be in your local town, whether it be in your county, whether it be in your state, and then at the systemic and institutional level. And this anti-racist local church audit, if there was any place you would find it on this framework, it's under the congregational level, taking action. Having the congregation take a moment in time throughout a year's period, which we require and recommend our churches to do in going through this process, to do a full assessment of who they are in this moment in time in their history, and hopefully begin to develop a strategic plan, action plan, that they can begin to move forward and transform themselves away from the white norms and white supremacy that has dominated their operations as a local church to truly becoming an anti-racist institution. I want to pause right here, if you don't mind, Julie, and just see if there's any questions, because I know I've shared a lot. What I'm going to do next is kind of walk into the additional preparatory work that we do with local churches and engage us in some what I would call a taste of the anti-racist audit by going into some small group time.
I have not seen any questions in the chat. Is there anyone who has a question? Please feel free to use the hand raise.
There is a Lisa Boyer.
Hi, thanks. Thank you, Reverend Silver.
Thank you.
My question is, I thought that the words of the, I think it was like the theological grounding for anti-racism was very moving. And I'm wondering if is that published somewhere, or are those words that you would share with others, or is that not really the purpose of what that statement was?
That's a good question. We have not thought about doing that, but something that I would take back to our racial justice team and say, hey, should we, do this? Maybe at least put it up on our Justice and Witness Action Network website. We do have a racial justice page on that website where we sort of outline some of the work that we were initially trying to engage our churches in back in 2020 as part of our Faith and Democracy campaign. But it is a resource that's within our anti-racist local church audit at the beginning section of that resource and tool. So it's there, and yeah, I think we probably should explore whether or not to make that available beyond that resource.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. There's another question.
There are a couple questions in the chat.
Okay.
Jeff Clauser asks, is it better for cultural bearers to deliver this messaging?
Can you clarify what you mean by cultural bearers, if I heard it correctly?
Jeff, can you unmute and clarify? Jeff?
Did you step away, Jeff?
No, I'm here.
Okay, go ahead.
Unmute button, sorry.
No problem.
Well, it comes down to the people who are, it basically comes down to when we look at racial justice or that sort of justice, is it better for the people who have experienced that to be the messenger than those of us who are supporters and allies of that? To speak truth to that and to get the point across.
Now I understand what you're saying. So yeah, there are many different thoughts around this. I think years ago, there was this perception that people of European descent really wanted to learn from impacted individuals, particularly people of African descent, about racism, how they experience it, and to learn from it. And there was a shift in the racial justice movement that said, no, the reality is white supremacy, white privilege, racism, racial injustice. All of these are issues of communities of European descent that they need to address on their own. Now, I'm beginning to hear today that there's some thinking that's beginning to shift back that says, well, no, we probably should not leave people of European descent alone to do this work by themselves. So I would say that, it's probably a both and to some degree. But the reality is, I think the majority share of this work needs to happen in predominantly communities of European descent. And that's why we have this anti-racist local church audit, and it's actually targeted towards our congregations that heavily populated with people of European descent.
And I think one of the reasons I asked that question is because oftentimes, like myself, I want to speak out to those things, but oftentimes maybe I don't say it right, or I sometimes sense that people say, oh, but you're coming at that from the white privilege perspective, when I feel like I'm actually trying to help. And, and I think other people might experience that sort of same thing. We're afraid to say something that might be misinterpreted, and maybe it's not helpful, but we think it's helpful.
I would say for a white person, you're probably always going to experience at some level someone pushing back against any way in which you engage in this work as the phrase that we like to use, a person who's standing in solidarity with or an ally. I think the reality is justice work is messy work. It's challenging work. It's difficult work. And one, you need to understand that, and one, you need not to be afraid to do that work because the reality is there's forces out here that wants to keep the structures in place that they are benefiting from. And in order for us to transform these systems, these institutions, even our local churches, it's going to require some conflict engagement, hopefully not physical conflict engagement.
Marvin, I think Jeffrey touches on something that is even more universal in our conference, and that is that we have many, many, many rural churches in areas where it is almost solely people of European descent, where our diversity is we have Amish among us.
Right.
And I think there is a struggle with how to engage when there is either a lack of people of color around us, or when we feel like everybody is expecting a handful of people to represent their entire
community. Right.
Yes.
Yeah. You don't need to have people of African descent or other communities of color present to deal with an issue that is rightfully yours. White supremacy is a white problem, a people of your descent, the problem that they need to address. And it's way past time that this be addressed, especially in our local churches. To answer that second question, is unconscious and conscious bias addressed in this? I would say yes and no. Yes, in the fact that when we engage, our expectation is when we engage local churches in this audit process and tool, that before we approach them, they will already have an understanding of what unbiased and biased, unconscious and conscious bias is. We are developing some preparatory training models that will prepare a congregation to engage this process and tool. But this tool is about putting the mirror, and not just the mirror, but really digging deep into who you are in your history as a church, how you currently operate, and begin to sort of transform, I would say a magnifying glass rather, to use that analogy, begin to sort of realize where white supremacy, white norms and racism is present in your operations. And then hopefully there's the conviction and the courage within you as leaders of your local church to want to transform how you operate, how you do ministry, how you do mission, so that you're not a reflection of a ideology, but you're reflecting the theology of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Let me continue to move forward, Julie. I know that we'll have a chance to come back to more questions.
We will.
Some of the preparatory work that we really encourage our lay leaders and pastors and local churches to engage in before you even approach us with wanting to use this tool, which we went through, again, a redevelopment process. We tested it with 2 of our congregations, did a focus group with one of our congregations, particularly a rural-based congregation that that's in an area of the conference that we know will be indifferent to racial justice work, to get their reaction to it. Now we have a final product that we're preparing to package up in print online form. And we're being very strategic about how we approach our churches. We're not just going to put this up on the website and say, here it is for you. No, we're actually strategically looking at our churches and determining who we think may be ready and prepared to do this work based upon our knowledge of their work and through an assessment, as well as not leaving it to them alone, but having them to work with and through one of our Sacred Conversation to End Racism facilitators. We have about 14 of those leaders in our conference who've gone through the National Offices program, and we're securing their commitments to work with us in this work. But one of the first things we ask our churches who sort of want to hop on the bandwagon that this church down here is doing that. Why don't we do the same thing as well too? That we really need individuals to really get a better understanding of their own racial autobiography. When was the first time you ever heard or learned about race or racism or what white supremacy was? You need to do that individual work first, right? In addition, as part of doing that individual work, which we know takes time and can be very challenging, we are developing some strategies. We've been wrestling with some ways in which how we can address the realities of change in local churches. So how do we develop the ability to hold controversy together within the tensions brought on by change in our local churches? Because we know oftentimes it's not God who's in control of many of our churches. It's the theology of we always done it this way. And that's a very, very powerful theology in our churches. We've always done it this way. So we have to live with that tension and deal with that power and dynamic in our local churches as well too. And then how do we dive deeper into the racial history of the church? Not just the individuals, but the church as an institution, as well as understanding the biblical stories that expose and deepen our resolve to do this work. So this is some of the preparatory work that we believe is critically important that a church does that leads them into wanting to explore and actually take action to want to change who they are as a congregation, as a unit, as a whole. So we're developing training modules to help our churches do this work, because right now there's a small number of churches that we have on our list that we would even approach about wanting to engage in this audit tool and process. Let me go to the next slide here. So readiness is critically important. And these are some questions that we ask ourselves to determine whether or not a congregation is ready. You know, what are the characteristics of a local church pastor and her leadership team that indicate readiness for this work? What does being ready really look like in the local church? And what does it look like for the local church to conduct its own racial autobiography? So this summer, we're going to be doing some preliminary preparatory work with one of our congregations who is eager to move forward and commit themselves for a full year to go through the anti-racist local church audit process and tool. And once we go through that preparatory work over the summer and early fall, then we will determine whether or not they're ready to move forward. We tend to believe that they are, but we want to make sure that taking them through some of this preparatory work will position them to really allow the audit process and tool to do the work that it needs to be done in their church, rather than them responding to and reacting indifferent to the process and the tool itself. So these are some guiding principles of the anti-racist local church audit. One, this process and tool will basically reveal the strengths and areas for growth in your local church. It also will put you in a position where you are looking to be authentic about who you are as a congregation, who God is calling to be as an authentic representation of the gospel of Jesus Christ. The tool, again, is a moment in time for you to do an assessment of who you are as a local church. It's about being intentionally representative. It's action-oriented. And let me make sure, if there's nothing else that you take away from this workshop, take this away. This is not another United Church of Christ program that takes church through a short-term process so they can designate themselves as such and such church or as an anti-racist local church. Anti-racism is not a designation or a destination. It is a lifelong journey of learning, of wrestling, of becoming. And out on the other side of going through this process and tool, we hope that the congregation will not only develop a strategic action plan, but actually implement that plan. And there is the understanding and the expectation that a local church will not just use the process and tool one time in their history. They may pick it back up, maybe 3 years or maybe 5 years later, to do another assessment at a point in time in their history, to determine the progress that they've made from the previous engagement with the process and the tool, so they can continue to do the hard work. And this is what it means about being transparent, because we require the church, those individuals who are doing this work, to really be transparent about who they are as a church. These are some of the domains that the audit covers. It's a full examination of the church. So your worship and celebration, what does that look like? Your education, your membership and hospitality, the fellowship, your social justice, your evangelism and outreach, your alliances and community relationships and partnerships with community groups. What about your business relationship? Connected to that, what about your budget, your finance? There's this old saying that a budget reflects your true priorities as an institution. What about your organizational policies and procedures? Your nomination and appointment process? What about your search and call process? Your physical plant and building design? And what about whether or not the church even offers anti-racism training for its staff and leaders to be a reflection of what it means to be anti-racist institution? So all of these are critically important to examine as part of this audit process and tool to determine where you are at this point in time as a local church, and then what hopefully you feel you need to do in order to start the journey to become an anti-racist institution. So what I want to do right now, Julie, is I want us to take a little bit of time and go into breakout groups. It is 7:25 right now. I want us to spend a minimum of 15 minutes in breakouts. I'm going to take a few minutes just to explain the breakout sessions. Each group will receive a sample of items from the survey tool. I want you to discuss how you think your congregation might answer these questions, and discuss how the questions relate to becoming an anti-racist church. This is the link that I want you to click on and go to. I'm actually going to click it now and see if I can bring it up and share my screen here. So there's going to be, there we go. It's going to be 4 groups if we can do that. I'm not sure if the numbers match up, Julie, but I would like for you to take 15 minutes minimum. Select someone who can sort of take notes, take away the major takeaways. I want you to silently read the questions that your group is assigned. Silently consider how your congregation might respond to the questions. Then each member of the group, I want you to share your response to the item, the question. And then, as a group, discuss how the questions relate to become an anti-racist church. And then when you come back, let's hear what comes out of that group time. So you can click.
I'm set up to create breakup rooms.
Okay.
But how do we get this information to the members?
So I'm going to go back again. Here is the
put that in the chat.
The link. I'm going to put that in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. It's a little bit easier. Okay. Make sure I got it all correctly.
Do you want to be in a breakout room?
No.
Okay.
Make sure I got it completely. So click on that, and how many is it of us? Without me,
4 or 5 people in per room is what we'll have, it says.
Okay, great. So let's do 4 groups and go to that page and follow the instructions. This is the link. I hope you can pull it up on your screen, and the instructions are there.
It's in the chat.
All right.
Okay, here goes.
Thank you.
Okay, so we, Mark, are not in a breakout room because I couldn't keep.
And Shirley, others,
Shirley, right.
yeah,
Everyone else is.
you may
But,
want to look at the groups and maybe assign some who may need to be assigned. And if it's okay, you want to pause the recording, just make sure you start it back up when we come back from the breakout sessions.
Can you do that, Shirley?
Got it.
Okay, great. Okay. There we go.
I got it.
I think Shirley got it.
I will mute myself.
Here come people.
Maybe we did it collectively together.
All right, people are coming back. Great. All right, more people are coming back. Okay, great. All right, so let's
We're back.
let's in about, we only have 15 minutes left in this, well, 14 minutes left. So let's take 10 minutes just to hear some report outs of some reactions from the groups. And I'm going to start with group number 4. And can you share the question that you had as well too?
I can take this if my group is okay with that, or I can at least start. So hello, greetings from group 4. We got organizational policies and procedures, and we knew we were in trouble already at that heading. Our question was, over the past 12 months, what are some of the changes the congregation has made in the bylaws, leadership structures, personnel policies, and formal expectations for committees and council or board intended to facilitate the congregation becoming an anti-racist church? So very small, easy, no big deal question. And we did not have answers to this question. And part of that is because of what the past 12 months have looked like, but we also recognize it's not a crutch to lean on. What we liked about this question is that it made us face our truth. It made those of us who would have in the past said, well, of course we're an anti-racist church. We do book studies, we do this, we do marches, we do flags, we do this, but we haven't done any of this. And that this is that foundational action, that needs to be happening before I think maybe you can really take on that title, or at least maybe we need to shift to saying we're on our way to becoming and that this is the work that needs to be done, and that the work that we are doing is important, and I think it is making a difference, but to see the question asked on this level and for us to just sort of sit silent and say, well, back to the drawing board for us. It was an eye-opener. So that's our answer, I believe.
Thank you, Katie. Any other insight from other group members?
I think Katie covered, at least from what I was there when I was there, really well.
Okay, great. I appreciate your honesty. Again, that's about being transparent, right? This is tough work, but we have to do it. Let's go with group number 2.
I can report on what our question is, and then I think I'll have the other person report on our findings. Here's the question. In your various curricula, visual arts, and icons, how is Jesus presented in relation to his skin tone and color? And a follow-up question, if you do not have any brown-skinned images of Jesus, how open would your education/worship leadership be to introducing this concept into the congregation? And who is going to report for our group, or who took the notes? Is that Susan?
I don't see it.
Yeah,
There you go.
yeah,
Unmute
yeah.
it.
I took the notes, but I thought you were gonna just keep going there, Shannon. Yeah, we had kind of a mixed, basically, from, yes, we already have some portrayals in our church of different things, and some have done some work with Christian ed departments in advising them when they buy curriculum to look for different ethnicities and how they use language and different cultures and so on and so forth. So we've done some of that work in some of our churches, and then another person in our group answered and said not really, but he thinks that their congregation would be quite open to it. At least some of it, not all of it. Don't take all of the blonde Jesuses, but you can take some of them and put some stuff up. So balance, moderation. And I guess we all kind of felt that way. But it was good to hear from our group that everyone had kind of made some strains in that way, was aware of making some, and I think, you know, our denomination has made us aware of the importance of that. So thank you. We had a lot of emphasis put on that. So yeah, would my group agree with that, number twos?
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay, I'll be very quiet out there.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. Let's go to group number 3.
Okay, I took the notes for group 3, and our question had to do with leadership. And so it said, building capacity for conducting anti-racism training requires intentionality. What formal or informal programs have been offered in the past year to grow congregational capacity to become anti-racist? So I'm not sure we specifically talked about, well, so one congregation has a whole program called Spark, and we're not sure what the acronym is completely, but they've been doing that for quite a while, and it's an anti-racism program that has involved reading and discussions and introspection and conversation, and they have made a lot of progress. And then there's Messiah University has an ecumenical group that helps churches discover ways to be intentional about anti-racism. And then someone else was pointing out trainings that are through the community. He said that there was a anti-racism course in seminary sponsored by the YMCA. And there's a Race Against Racism, which is an annual like community, I don't know if it's a 5K or not, but road race. And that also he had been involved through Creation Justice Ministries. And then we talked a little bit about people's experience with the UCC curriculum and other curricula, and looking at issues of justice beyond groups of African descent to other people in other non-European descent groups. And got into a little bit of, so our conversation kind of strayed a little bit from the leadership, but we covered a lot of ground, sort of going into the idea of integrating with the communities, not trying to bring them into us, because that can be overwhelming and scary, but us taking the steps to reach out and go to them and learn about them and their histories and stories.
Jean, thank you for sharing. Appreciate that. Let's go to the last group.
I was the recorder. Do you want me to speak, Julian, or do you want to? Well, actually, I reread the question right before, and I'm not quite sure we had the right discussion. So the question was around worship and programs of worship and celebration, and what we talked about were some of the things that other groups had talked about. Our group in my church, we do Spark, which is St. Paul's Against Racism, Creating Change, which we originally started with reading about, and now we're moving into the action. And when you look at all of the members of the group, we're involved in a lot of different things, voting, assisting, refugee resettlement. Alyssa and Martha and Karen are also in that group. So, I mean, a lot of the members themselves are in a lot of things. But I think the question really was around the worship as a whole. And our pastors, which Pastor Alyssa is one of those, speak about it from the pulpit often. It is not something that only comes after, Martin Luther King or Black History Month. It is something that is spoken from the pulpit often. We put out the rainbow doors, and then we added to our rainbow doors, Black Lives Matter. And Alyssa can probably speak to this more than me, but Pastor Alyssa, I'm sorry. But people stop in celebration, and people stop in why the heck are you doing that? So it's a continued statement that we make in the community. Julian is also part of a group called Come to the Table in Lebanon and Lancaster, and they have been looking at a number of key issues around anti-racism, and he feels very connected to that group. So there were only 2 of us in our group. So Julian, anything else you want to say about come to the table?
You're muted, Julian. Unmute and take a quick minute, and then we're going to wrap up.
Okay, good.
There you go.
Yes, one of the things that I was not able to go, but they went to there was a school in Carlisle for Native Americans. And I did not have the opportunity to go there, but that would have been a very interesting trip to have made. And we have been there. We've had discussions about the indigenous people, and how they have been treated, and about the doctrine of discovery and issues like that. I just pulled off my shelf here, but you really can't see this very well. And this is I got this icon when I was when I was serving at Trinity Church here in Hanover, and this is a picture of Joseph and Jesus. And you can see that they're both very dark-skinned people. I really got it because I saw we needed more mentors and male mentors, and so I got this as something to be in my office and to share with others. So that was one thing I'd been searching for quite a while, to get a picture of Joseph. So many pictures of holding Jesus, and so I got one with Joseph, and they do reflect, I think, that they would be dark-skinned people. Another 6 months, and I think I could be able to share a lot more with you about CC&T, and perhaps we will have some churches in the Hanover area will have something going on by then. Right now, I think it's because we have an interim pastor, and it's Kim Blocker, excellent interim pastor, a good preacher. And I would say, in terms of people, she introduces a lot of things in her sermon, and one is that certainly that Jesus, where he lived, he would definitely be a dark-skinned person, and that's something that has come up a number of times in worship, and then in the fellowship times right after the service.
Appreciate you sharing that, Julian. Appreciate you doing that. Yes, and appreciate
just,
all of you taking that time to engage in that work.
Just want to state that there must have been 2 group 1s, because
yes, there were.
we were part of a group 1 too. You haven't asked us yet.
Okay, go ahead, Jeffrey. Jump
Well,
in there.
I'm not the spokesperson.
Not the
I'll let-
spokesperson. Who's that spokesperson?
That would be me.
Okay.
So some of us are, most of us were are in very Euro white churches, and but one of us was in a much more mixed racially congregation, and you know, we do struggle with the okay, it's Black History Month, let's pull out Lift Every Voice and Sing, or something like that, and
Right.
and that is definitely problematic, because as somebody said, you know, it needs to be every week, and it needs to be just a part of who we are.
Yep. Liturgy, songs.
Yes.
All of
yes.
that.
And what the person who is in a much more mixed church said, which is so beautiful, when we remember, I think this is my words, all of God's people, we move the gospel forward when we acknowledge and address racism every week, and then we live it out in the world, and then we continue to move the gospel message forward. That's, I think, our biggest takeaway from me from our time. I'll let anybody else talk who wanted to say
Great.
something else.
Thanks for sharing that, Patty. I wish we had more time to dig deep in this, but this was an opportunity to sort of give you sort of a peek into this anti-racist local church audit process in tool. And the tool portion of it is the survey, which the questions. Now, 4 questions, right? This survey tool, using a Word document, covers about 50 something pages of questions. So it really digs deeply into who we are as a church. Again, looking at all those different domains that I mentioned earlier to do some real examination. And it uses the framework that we developed in the Central Atlantic Conference to really explore how you do the raising awareness work, how do you do the capacity building, and then how do you also take the action. So this is how we in the Central Atlantic Conference are trying to move the racial justice agenda forward in the local church, because we think it's critically important that our churches don't just engage in book studies, don't just engage in putting the banner outside the church, don't just engage in pulling out the African-American historical hymnals during Black History Month, all the things that unfortunately happen in many of our congregations. But how do we really begin to sort of embody the gospel at a deeper level within our local churches and really begin to reflect, or at least make the commitment to move forward to become an anti-racist institution? The PowerPoint presentation, yes, I can make that available. Of course, this recording hopefully will be made available by Shirley or someone else who is leading the operations of your annual meeting. But I would encourage you. Okay, great. But I would encourage you, as you begin to sort of think through in the context of participating in tonight's workshop, where your congregation may be, that you begin to sort of wrestle with the reality of who you are as a local church now and where you may need to go, and not hesitate to have the courage to take action. So I want to just thank you for your time. I don't want to keep you past. It was already 8:04. I think we actually hit the hour-and-a-half mark in terms of when we officially started. Prayers and blessings to you for the rest of your annual meeting. Prayers and blessings to you as you continue to move the racial justice forward in your local church and hopefully across the United Church of Christ. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it.